The town of Pine Ridge was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names. It wasn't big or flashy, just a collection of small houses spread out along winding roads. Most people liked it that way, quiet and predictable. But for Daniel Carter, life hadn't been quiet since the day his son went missing. 15 years had passed, but the memory still felt fresh, like a wound that refused to heal. Ethan Carter had been 16 when he disappeared. He was a bright kid, full of energy and dreams, though sometimes those dreams clashed with reality. His father, Daniel, worked as a mechanic at the local garage, fixing cars and keeping things running smoothly. Life wasn't easy, but it was steady. Ethan's mother, Laura, stayed home most days, tending to the garden and cooking meals. They weren't rich, but they were happy, or so it seemed on the surface. Things changed one rainy evening in late October. Ethan and Daniel got into an argument about school. Ethan wanted to drop out and travel, see the world beyond Pine Ridge. Daniel didn't understand why his son couldn't appreciate what he already had. "You've got a roof over your head, food on the table, and a future ahead of you," Daniel said, his voice rising with frustration. "Why throw all that away?" "I'm stuck here," Ethan shouted back, slamming his fist on the kitchen table. "Nothing ever happens in this town. I can't live like this anymore." Laura tried to calm them down, but her words fell flat. Ethan stormed out of the house, grabbing his jacket and slamming the door behind him. That was the last time anyone saw him. Daniel searched everywhere that night. The streets, the park, the woods near their house. He called Ethan's friends, checked his favorite hangouts, and even drove around town hoping to spot him walking home. But there was no sign of him. By morning, panic set in. Laura called the police, and soon the whole town was talking about Ethan's disappearance. For weeks, volunteers combed through the surrounding forests and fields. Flyers with Ethan's picture were posted on every lamppost and bulletin board. Neighbors brought casseroles to the Carter's house, offering comfort and support. But as days turned into months, hope began to fade. No clues surfaced, no witnesses came forward. It was as if Ethan had vanished into thin air. Laura struggled to cope. She spent hours sitting by the window staring out at the road, waiting for a figure that never appeared. Eventually, she decided to leave Pine Ridge. Her sister lived in another state, and Laura thought a change of scenery might help her heal. She begged Daniel to come with her, but he refused. "This is our home," he told her firmly, "and I'm not giving up on Ethan." After Laura left, Daniel threw himself into work, fixing cars and avoiding questions from curious neighbors. On weekends, he visited the spot where Ethan was last seen, an old oak tree near the edge of the forest. He'd bring flowers and sit there for hours, imagining what might have happened. Had Ethan run away? Been kidnapped? Or worse? Years went by, and Pine Ridge moved on. New families moved in, old ones moved out. The flyers faded and tore away in the wind. People stopped asking Daniel about Ethan, assuming he'd accepted the truth. His son was gone forever. But Daniel couldn't let go. Every year on Ethan's birthday, he returned to the oak tree, leaving fresh flowers and whispering promises to the empty air. "I'll find you," he'd say, "no matter how long it takes." 15 years later, Daniel was still searching, though he didn't know it yet. His hair had turned gray, and his hands bore the calluses of decades spent turning wrenches. He lived alone now in the same house where Ethan grew up. The rooms felt emptier without Laura, but Daniel didn't mind. He preferred solitude to pitying stares or awkward conversations. One chilly autumn afternoon, Daniel decided to visit a thrift store downtown. He didn't often shop there. It wasn't really his thing, but something about the crisp air and golden sunlight made him feel restless. Maybe browsing through old junk would distract him from the heaviness in his chest. The thrift store was tucked between a bakery and a hardware shop, its windows cluttered with mismatched items. Inside, shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten treasures, chipped mugs, faded photographs, dusty books. Daniel wandered aimlessly, trailing his fingers along the edges of tables stacked with odds and ends. Then he saw it, a plain leather journal tucked inside a cardboard box labeled Miscellaneous. Its cover was worn but sturdy, embossed with faded gold letters spelling out property of EC. Daniel froze. Those initials matched Ethan's name perfectly. Heart pounding, he picked up the journal and flipped it open. The first page contained a date scribbled in messy handwriting. October 15th, 15 years ago. The exact night Ethan disappeared. Daniel's hands trembled as he turned the pages. Each entry was written in pencil, some clearer than others. Sketches of strange landscapes and machines filled the margins. Notes described unfamiliar creatures and experiments conducted in sterile rooms. One passage read, "They watch us constantly. Their eyes are everywhere. I don't know why they keep me here, but I think they're trying to learn from me." Beneath the note was a crude drawing of a towering metallic structure surrounded by humanoid figures with elongated limbs. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. This had to be Ethan's writing. There was no doubt in his mind. Clutching the journal tightly, Daniel paid for it and hurried home. As he walked, memories flooded back. The sound of Ethan's laughter, the smell of pancakes on lazy Sunday mornings, the sharp sting of their final argument. For the first time in 15 years, Daniel allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Back at the house, he sat at the kitchen table and opened the journal again. Page after page revealed fragments of Ethan's life after he vanished. Some entries were desperate, others resigned. One stood out among the rest. "If anyone finds this, tell Dad I'm sorry." Tears blurred Daniel's vision as he traced the words with his fingertips. Sorry? What did Ethan have to be sorry for? He was the one who'd been taken, not willingly, not freely. Whatever horrors he'd faced, whatever unimaginable experiences he'd endured, none of it was his fault. As night fell, Daniel lit a lamp and kept reading. The journal hinted at captivity aboard some kind of vessel, possibly extraterrestrial. References to stars, planets, and alien beings suggested Ethan wasn't on Earth anymore. Yet despite the fear and confusion evident in his writing, Ethan's determination shone through. He hadn't given up. Not completely. Daniel closed the IA journal and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with questions. Who or what had taken Ethan? Where was he now? And most importantly, how could Daniel find him? For the first time in years, Daniel felt a purpose stronger than grief. He wouldn't stop until he uncovered the truth. Whatever it took, wherever it led, he vowed to bring his son home. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying whispers of secrets hidden deep within the forest. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. His mind kept replaying the words he'd read in the journal, Ethan's words. Each sentence felt like a piece of a puzzle, incomplete but brimming with meaning. He sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, flipping through the pages again and again. The journal was worn, its edges frayed, but it held more answers than Daniel had ever hoped to find. The next morning, Daniel woke up exhausted but restless. He knew he needed help. This wasn't something he could figure out alone. After some thought, he decided to visit Grace Miller, a retired journalist who lived on the outskirts of Pine Ridge. Grace had always been sharp-witted and curious, qualities that made her perfect for digging into mysteries. Though she rarely left her house these days, Daniel hoped she'd agree to lend a hand. Grace greeted him warmly when he knocked on her door. She was in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair tied back in a loose bun and glasses perched on her nose. Her home smelled faintly of coffee and old books. When Daniel explained why he'd come, holding up the journal as evidence, Grace's eyes widened with interest. "This is incredible," she said, taking the journal from him and skimming through its pages. "If this really belongs to Ethan, then we might have a chance to understand what happened to him." Grace invited Daniel inside, and they spent hours discussing the journal's contents. She pointed out patterns Daniel hadn't noticed before. Recurring symbols, strange descriptions of machines, and references to experiments. One entry mentioned a triangular structure surrounded by glowing lights. Another described beings with elongated limbs and large unblinking eyes. "These sound like descriptions of extraterrestrial life," Grace said cautiously. "There are reports of similar sightings across the country. people claim to have encountered aliens or been abducted. Daniel frowned. The idea of aliens seemed far-fetched, even ridiculous. But how else could he explain what he'd read? The journal painted a picture of captivity, isolation, and fear. Things no human should endure. If Ethan truly wrote this, then he must have been taken somewhere beyond Earth. Grace suggested they start by investigating the locations mentioned in the journal. Many entries referred to forests and remote areas, including places near Pine Ridge. Maybe there's physical evidence out there, she said. Something we can use to track down where Ethan went, or who took him. The following day, armed with flashlights, notebooks, and cameras, Daniel and Grace set out to explore the woods near the old oak tree. It was a chilly afternoon, and the air smelled of damp leaves and pine needles. As they walked deeper into the forest, the world around them grew quieter, the sounds of civilization fading away. Grace led the way, consulting a map she'd brought along. The journal mentioned landmarks, a stream, a cluster of boulders, and a clearing with a peculiar rock formation. They followed the trail carefully, their footsteps crunching against the fallen leaves. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached the clearing. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, a patch of grass surrounded by towering trees. But as Daniel scanned the area, something caught his eye. Near the base of a large tree lay a glint of metal half buried in the dirt. "What's that?" Grace asked, pointing toward it. Daniel knelt down and brushed away the soil. What he uncovered sent chills down his spine. It was a piece of curved metal, scorched and dented, unlike anything he'd seen before. Its surface shimmered faintly in the sunlight, reflecting colors that didn't quite match the natural surroundings. "Do you think this is part of a spacecraft?" Grace whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and unease. "I don't know," Daniel admitted, "but it doesn't look like anything from around here." As they examined the object, Grace snapped photos with her camera, while Daniel jotted down notes. The discovery gave them hope. Tangible proof that Ethan's story might be real, but it also raised more questions. Who had left this behind and why? Suddenly the atmosphere shifted. The temperature dropped sharply and a low hum filled the air. It wasn't loud, but it was impossible to ignore. Daniel and Grace exchanged nervous glances. "Did you hear that?" Grace asked, clutching her flashlight tightly. Before Daniel could respond, the hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Bright lights appeared above the treetops, hovering silently. They were too bright to look at directly, forcing Daniel and Grace to shield their eyes. "What's happening?" Grace shouted over the noise. "I don't know," Daniel yelled back, grabbing her arm. "We need to get out of here." But it was too late. The lights expanded, engulfing them in a blinding white glow. Daniel felt a strange sensation, as if his body were being pulled upward. He tried to resist, but it was futile. Within seconds, everything went black. When Daniel came to, he found himself lying on a cold, smooth surface. His head throbbed and his vision was blurry. Slowly, he sat up and looked around. He was no longer in the forest. Instead, he was inside a vast chamber bathed in soft blue light. The walls were metallic and seamless, curving upward into a domed ceiling. Strange symbols pulsed faintly along the edges of the room, emitting a gentle hum. Beside him, Grace stirred, groaning softly. "Where are we?" she murmured, rubbing her temples. "I don't know," Daniel replied, his voice hoarse. "But I think we're not on Earth anymore." As they tried to make sense of their surroundings, a figure emerged from the shadows. At first, Daniel didn't recognize him. Then he saw the freckles, the hazel eyes, the familiar shape of his jaw. "Ethan?" Daniel whispered, his heart pounding. The man nodded, his expression wary. "Dad?" he said quietly. "You shouldn't have come here." Daniel stood up, tears welling in his eyes. Despite the years that had passed, despite the changes time had wrought, this was undeniably his son. "Ethan," he repeated, stepping closer. "I've been looking for you for so long." Ethan hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "We don't have much time," he said urgently. "They'll be back soon." Who? Grace asked, standing beside Daniel. Who are they? Ethan sighed heavily. The ones who brought me here. They call themselves the Observers. They study us, learn from us. I've been trying to survive, to find a way back. His voice trailed off as the hum returned, louder this time. The chamber began to vibrate, and the glowing symbols on the walls brightened. Ethan grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him toward a narrow corridor. We need to hide, Ethan said. If they catch you, they won't let you leave. Daniel and Grace followed him, their minds racing with questions. Who were these observers? What did they want? And how could they possibly escape? For now, all they could do was trust Ethan and hope they could find a way back home. The narrow corridor was cold and dim, its walls made of the same smooth metallic material as the chamber they had just left. Daniel followed Ethan closely, his heart pounding in his chest. Grace trailed behind, clutching her notebook tightly, her face pale but resolute. None of them spoke as they moved quickly, their footsteps echoing softly against the strange surface beneath their feet. Ethan led them to a small alcove hidden behind a curve in the wall. He motioned for them to stay, quiet, and pressed himself flat against the cool metal, peering out cautiously. Daniel watched his son, trying to take in every detail. Ethan looked older. His once boyish features were sharper now, his shoulders broader. There were lines on his face that hadn't been there 15 years ago, signs of hardship and struggle. But despite the changes, his hazel eyes still held the same spark of determination Daniel remembered. What's going on? Daniel finally whispered, breaking the silence. Who are these observers, and where are we? Ethan glanced back at him, his expression grim. We're on their ship, he said quietly. It's hard to explain. They're not like us. They don't think or feel the way we do. To them, we're just experiments. Experiments? Grace asked, her voice trembling slightly. What kind of experiments? They study us, Ethan replied. They want to understand how humans think, how we adapt, how we survive. I've been here for 15 years, Dad. 15 years of tests, questions, and isolation. His voice cracked on the last word and he turned away, rubbing his temples as if trying to block out painful memories. Daniel reached out and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. I'm sorry, he said softly. I didn't know. I thought you'd run away or something else. I never imagined. It's not your fault, Ethan interrupted, shaking his head. You couldn't have known. No one could. Before Daniel could respond, a low humming sound filled the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan tensed, his eyes darting toward the entrance of the alcove. They're coming, he whispered urgently. Stay close to me, and don't make a sound. The three of them huddled together, holding their breath as the hum grew deafening. Moments later, two figures appeared in the corridor. They were tall and slender, with translucent skin that seemed to shimmer in the blue light. Their large, almond-shaped eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at them. These weren't just aliens. They were something entirely beyond human comprehension. The creatures paused near the alcove, tilting their heads as if sensing something amiss. Daniel clenched his fists, fighting the urge to bolt. Beside him, Grace gripped her notebook so tightly her knuckles turned white. Ethan remained perfectly still, his body tense but controlled. After what felt like an eternity, the creatures moved on, disappearing around a bend in the corridor. The hum faded, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Ethan let out a shaky breath and turned to Daniel and Grace. We need to move, he said. If they catch you, they won't let you go. Not without erasing your memories first. Erasing our memories? Grace echoed, horrified. Why would they do that? To protect themselves, Ethan explained. They don't want anyone knowing about them or this place. That's why I've been stuck here for so long. Every time I tried to escape, they caught me and wiped my memory of the attempt. It's only recently that I've managed to stay ahead of them. Daniel frowned. But how did you even end up here? What happened after you disappeared? Ethan hesitated, then began to speak. That night, the night I left, I was heading toward the woods to clear my head. I wasn't thinking straight. When I got to the clearing near the oak tree, I saw lights in the sky. At first, I thought it was a plane or a meteor. But then, something descended from the clouds. A ship. It pulled me inside before I could react. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. I woke up here in this place. They started running tests on me right away, scanning my brain, probing my body. I didn't understand what was happening at first. All I knew was that I was scared and alone. Grace listened intently, scribbling notes in her notebook. Did they communicate with you? She asked. How did you learn about them? At first, no, Ethan admitted. They don't speak the way we do, but over time I started picking up fragments of their thoughts, images, emotions, ideas. It's not easy. It's like trying to decipher a language you've never heard before. Eventually, I figured out enough to communicate back, using drawings and gestures. That's when they stopped treating me like a lab rat and started seeing me as something else. Something else? Daniel prompted. A bridge, Ethan said simply. Between them and us. They wanted to learn about humanity through me, about our emotions, our creativity, our resilience. I guess I became important to them in some way. Daniel shook his head, struggling to process everything. This is insane, he muttered. Aliens? Spaceships? Memory wipes? How is any of this real? It's real, Dad, Ethan said firmly. And it's dangerous. You shouldn't have come here. Neither of you. Grace stepped forward, her tone calm but insistent. We came because we care about Ethan. Because we want to help him and because we deserve answers. Whatever risks we're taking, they're worth it. Ethan looked at her, then at Daniel, his expression softening. I appreciate that, he said. But getting you out of here won't be easy. The observers won't let you leave willingly. We'll need a plan. What kind of plan? Daniel asked. Ethan hesitated, glancing down the corridor. There's a section of the ship where they store data, records of everything they've learned from their studies. If we can access it, we might find a way to disable their systems temporarily. Enough time for us to escape. And where? Does this section lead? Grace asked. To an exit pod, Ethan replied. It's how they send subjects back to Earth after they're done with them. But it's heavily guarded. Getting there will be risky. Daniel squared his shoulders, determination replacing fear. Then we'll take the risk, he said. We didn't come all this way to turn back now. Ethan nodded, though worry lingered in his eyes. All right, he said, but we'll need to move fast. Follow me and do exactly as I say. With that, Ethan led them deeper into the ship, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with practiced ease. As they walked, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The walls seemed alive, pulsing faintly with energy. The air was thick with tension, every step carrying the weight of uncertainty. Finally, they reached a door, marked with intricate symbols that glowed brighter as Ethan approached. He pressed his hand against the surface and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a vast chamber filled with floating screens displaying streams of data. Strange shapes and patterns danced across the displays, shifting and rearranging in ways that defied logic. This is it, Ethan whispered. The data core. Help me find the controls for the exit pod. Grace immediately began examining the screens, her journalist instincts kicking in. Daniel stayed close to Ethan, ready to act if anything went wrong. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, not just surviving, but fighting for something greater than himself. As they worked, the hum returned, louder and more urgent than before. They're coming, Ethan said sharply. Hurry, the race against time had begun. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the chamber like an alarm. Daniel's hands trembled as he helped Ethan search the glowing screens for the controls to the exit pod. Grace stood nearby, scribbling notes furiously, her sharp eyes scanning the holographic displays for anything that resembled Earth-like technology. This isn't going to work, Grace muttered under her breath, None of this makes sense. It's all alien. It doesn't have to make sense, Ethan replied sharply, his voice tense. Just find something that looks like it could activate a launch sequence, anything. Daniel glanced over his upper shoulder, half expecting the observers to burst into the room at any moment. His heart raced as he thought about what might happen if they were caught. Would the aliens erase their memories, or worse, would they keep them here forever, just like they had done to Ethan? Here, Grace suddenly exclaimed, pointing to a cluster of symbols on one of the floating screens. These look different from the others. They're pulsing faster, almost like they're reacting to us. Ethan rushed over, studying the symbols closely. You're right, he said after a moment. This might be it, but we'll need to trigger it manually. There's no way to automate the process without alerting the ship's systems. How do we do that? Daniel asked, stepping closer. Ethan hesitated, then placed his hand on a panel beneath the screen. Instantly, the symbols lit up brighter, and the entire chamber began to vibrate. A low whirring sound filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. We've activated the sequence, Ethan explained quickly. But we only have a few minutes before the observers detect the breach. We need to get to the exit pod now. Without waiting for a response, Ethan led them out of the data core and back into the corridor. The hum was deafening now, reverberating through the walls as if the ship itself were alive and angry. Shadows flickered in the distance, shapes moving too quickly to identify. They're coming, Daniel shouted, gripping Grace's arm to steady her as she stumbled. Keep moving, Ethan urged, glancing behind them. We're close. They turned a corner and found themselves facing another door, this one marked with a single glowing symbol. Ethan pressed his palm against it, and the door slid open to reveal a small, cylindrical chamber. Inside was what looked like a capsule, a sleek metallic pod just large enough to fit 2 or 3 people. That's it, Ethan said, motioning for them to climb inside. This will take you back to Earth. What about you? Daniel demanded, stopping in his tracks. You're coming with us, aren't you? Ethan shook his head, his expression grim. I can't, he said. If I leave, the observers will follow. They won't let me go. Not after everything they've learned from me. Besides, someone needs to stay behind and cover our escape. If they realize you're gone, they'll come after you. No, Daniel protested, stepping toward his son. I didn't come all this way just to lose you again. You're coming with us, Ethan. That's final. Ethan met his father's gaze, his hazel eyes filled with both resolve and sadness. Dad, please, he said softly. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about keeping you and Grace safe. If I leave, they'll hunt you down. Is that what you want? Before Daniel could respond, Grace intervened. He's right, she said gently, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. We don't have time to argue. If we don't go now, none of us will make it out. Daniel clenched his fists, tears welling in his eyes. He wanted to argue, to demand that Ethan join them. But deep down, he knew his son was right. This wasn't just about saving Ethan, it was about survival. Fine, Daniel relented, his voice breaking. But promise me you'll find a way back someday. Promise me you won't give up. Ethan nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I promise, he said. Now go. Quickly. Grace climbed into the pod first, followed by Daniel. As the hatch sealed shut behind them, Ethan stepped back, raising a hand in farewell. The pod shuddered slightly, then began to rise, levitating off the ground as a bright light enveloped it. Through the window, Daniel watched as Ethan grew smaller and smaller, his figure fading into the blue glow of the alien ship. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Daniel felt a surge of emotion. Pride, grief, and hope all rolled into one. Then the light intensified and everything went white. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he found himself lying on cold, damp grass. Above him, the stars twinkled brightly in the night sky. Beside him, Grace groaned softly, sitting up and rubbing her temples. Where are we? She asked, looking around. Daniel sat up slowly, recognizing the familiar outline of the old oak tree nearby. They were back in the forest outside Pine Ridge, the same place where their journey had begun. We made it, Daniel whispered, relief washing over him. We're home. But even as he spoke, a pang of guilt settled in his chest. Ethan was still out there, trapped aboard the alien ship. Though they had escaped, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that their mission wasn't truly over. As they walked back toward town, Daniel vowed silently to keep searching for answers. Somewhere beyond the stars, his son was waiting. And no matter how long it took, Daniel would find a way to bring him home. For now, though, they were safe, and that was enough. Back in Pine Ridge, life slowly returned to normal, or at least it appeared that way on the surface. Daniel and Grace tried to pick up where they had left off before their encounter with the unknown. But for Daniel, nothing felt normal anymore. Every moment of silence reminded him of Ethan's absence. Every star in the sky seemed to whisper his son's name. He couldn't stop thinking about the promise he'd made, to find a way to bring Ethan home no matter what it took. Grace noticed the change in him almost immediately. While she was content to let the events fade into memory, Daniel became obsessed with uncovering more answers. He spent hours in his attic, poring over the journal and searching online for anything related to UFO sightings, alien abductions, or mysterious disappearances. His once tidy workspace was now cluttered with maps, articles, and handwritten notes. "Daniel," Grace said one evening as she joined him in the attic, "you can't keep doing this to yourself. You need to rest. Let things settle." "I can't," Daniel replied without looking up from his laptop. "Ethan's still out there, Grace. I promised him I wouldn't give up. How can I just sit here and pretend everything's fine?" Grace sighed, pulling up a chair beside him. "I understand why you feel this way," she said gently. "But obsessing over it isn't going to help. You're exhausted, Daniel. When was the last time you slept properly?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to an article on his screen, a report about a farmer in Nebraska who claimed to have seen a triangular craft hovering over his fields. "What if these sightings are connected?" he asked. "What if they've been here all along, watching us, taking people like Ethan? If we could track their movements, or what? If you're chasing shadows?" Grace interrupted. "Not everything has an explanation, Daniel. Sometimes mysteries stay unsolved." Daniel shook his head stubbornly. "I can't accept that," he said. "Not when it comes to my son." Grace knew there was no changing his mind. She decided to help him instead, hoping to guide his efforts in a more productive direction. Together, they began compiling information: eyewitness accounts, government documents, and even conspiracy theories. They marked locations on a map where strange occurrences had been reported, connecting the dots to see if a pattern emerged. One night, while reviewing the data, Grace spotted something unusual. Several reports mentioned similar symbols to those sketched in Ethan's journal: triangles, circles, and lines arranged in intricate patterns. These symbols had appeared near crop circles in remote forests and even carved into rocks in deserts. "Look at this," Grace said, showing Daniel a photograph of a rock formation etched with markings. "Doesn't this look familiar?" Daniel grabbed the photo and compared it to one of Ethan's drawings. The resemblance was undeniable. "This has to mean something," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "If we can figure out where these symbols appear, maybe we can trace them back to the observers, or at least find another lead." The discovery reignited their search. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Grace traveled to various locations tied to the symbols. They visited abandoned farms, dense woods, and barren stretches of desert, always careful to document their findings. Along the way, they met others who claimed to have encountered unexplainable phenomena, people who spoke of missing loved ones, eerie lights in the sky, and brief glimpses of otherworldly beings. Despite the mounting evidence, skepticism lingered in Daniel's mind. Was he grasping at straws, desperate to hold on to hope? Or was he truly onto something? Then, during a trip to a secluded valley in Arizona, they found something extraordinary. Hidden beneath a cluster of boulders was a metallic object partially buried in the dirt. It looked like part of a spacecraft, identical to the fragment Daniel had discovered years earlier near the oak tree. But this piece was larger, more intact, and bore faint engravings that matched the symbols in Ethan's journal. "This is it," Daniel whispered, running his fingers over the smooth surface. This proves we're not imagining things. Whatever. Took Ethan, it's real. Grace nodded, her expression serious. So what do we do now? She asked. Daniel thought for a moment, then pulled out his phone. We call someone who knows more about this than we do, he said. Someone who might be able to help us make sense of it. That someone turned out to be Dr. Emily Ross, a retired astrophysicist and expert on extraterrestrial life. Though, skeptical at first, she agreed to meet with them after hearing their story and examining the artifacts. Dr. Ross studied the metallic fragment carefully, using specialized equipment to analyze its composition. After several hours, she called Daniel and Grace into her lab. This material isn't from Earth, she told them bluntly. It's unlike anything I've ever seen before. The structure, the density, it's advanced technology, far beyond our capabilities. What does that mean? Daniel asked, his heart pounding. It means, Dr. Ross continued, that whoever created this isn't human, and based on the symbols engraved here, they may have been communicating with us, or studying us for a very long time. Daniel exchanged a glance with Grace. This was the confirmation they needed. The observers were real and they were still out there somewhere. So how do we find them? Grace asked. That's the tricky part, Dr. Ross admitted. If they wanted to be found, they would have made contact already. But... She hesitated, then added, there is one possibility. Some researchers believe these symbols act as coordinates, markers pointing to specific locations in space. If we decode them correctly, we might be able to pinpoint where they come from. Daniel's eyes widened. Can you do that? He asked. I'll try, Dr. Ross replied. But it won't be easy. We'll need time, and access to powerful telescopes and databases. Are you willing to wait? Yes, Daniel said without hesitation. As long as it takes. With renewed purpose, Daniel threw himself into the decoding process alongside Dr. Ross and Grace. Days turned into weeks and progress was slow but steady. Each breakthrough brought them closer to understanding the symbol's meaning and potentially locating the observer's home world. Through it all, Daniel kept Ethan's journal close, drawing strength from his son's words. One entry stood out to him in particular. They watch us constantly. Their eyes are everywhere. He realized now that Ethan hadn't just been writing about captivity. He'd been describing a truth far greater than anyone could have imagined. The observers weren't just visitors, they were watchers, guardians of secrets humanity wasn't ready to comprehend. And somewhere among those secrets was Ethan. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Daniel allowed himself to dream, not of closure but of reunion. No matter how distant or impossible it seemed, he held on to the belief that he would see his son again. For now, though, the search continued.